In this episode, we discuss a fact-finding committee report that reveals how the recent stampede in Goa could have been entirely avoided. We also take a look at President Droupadi Murmu's statement questioning a recent Supreme Court judgment. But first, we talk about autism and why the current US administration's approach could negatively impact both its treatment and research. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last month, a study published in the US revealed that some regions in the country had witnessed a significant increase in the case of autism, a neurodevelopmental disorder that causes difficulties with social interaction and communication. And while many experts believe that this is due to increased awareness and broader criteria, it led the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., to calling autism an epidemic and saying that we should be looking at external factors and environmental exposures to find out the cause.
This is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. It has to be. Genes do not cause epidemics. They can provide a vulnerability. You need an environmental toxin to study environmental factors, to study exposures, to study external factors, and that's where we're going to find the answer.
His comments received sharp criticism from various health and medical professionals, with many concerned that this approach would derail advancements made to help those with autism and further stigmatize the disorder. Now, to know more about these concerns and the disorder itself, my colleague Shashank Bhargava spoke to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt in this segment.
Anonna, when RFK Jr., who is the equivalent of a health minister in the US, when he said that, we should look at and study external factors for autism, what did he mean by that?
What he wanted to say is that there has been an increase in the number of people diagnosed with autism, and this sort of, sharp rise is likely because of some factors with which we are living. And of course, there have been some links that have so far been established with air pollution and some toxins, etc. But none of these are the cause of autism. These are all risk factors for a child developing autism or autism spectrum disorder.
Right, and risk factors are one thing, but do we know what actually causes autism?
So that's one of the reasons why there is so much speculation surrounding the condition. It's something which we wouldn't say is a disease. It's a neurodevelopment disorder, and there's a spectrum. So you would have some people who are highly functional. And then there's also another whole spectrum of people who are absolutely unable to communicate with people. They do not, speak verbally. They might do some signs, and sometimes there's a tendency to, repeat self-harming actions like banging the head, etc. So it's a whole spectrum of symptoms that you would see in people with ASD. And the challenge is that there have been several studies over the years which have tried to link ASD with different factors. But you would note that I'm saying link. They have only been able to establish that, in people with ASD, there was a history of the mother having some, infection during pregnancy, or, the child being born with asphyxia where, they don't receive enough oxygen, etc. So they've been able to link with several factors, but what they haven't been able to find is a cause. So even when the scientists looked for various genetic mutations in the DNA of people who have autism, they didn't find one specific gene mutation which could be linked with autism. There were several mutations. They have seen, hundreds of mutations, and it's not necessary that everybody has all those 100 mutations. So it's a different set of mutations they've seen in different set of people. So there is no way to say that, this is the one thing that causes autism. But there are, of course, several factors that have been shown to increase the risk of autism.
Right, and in that sense, genetics also plays a role. Your chances go up if a family member also has it. But again, that's not a one-to-one link. But we are talking about this because of what RFK Jr. has been saying about autism. And since we are talking about him, we should place him into context. He is someone who is trained as an environment lawyer, and he has propagated a lot of conspiracy theories, he has questioned a lot of scientific research, and has amplified a lot of unfounded claims like vaccines are tied to autism, for example. And he's also a known vaccine skeptic. He's also said that HIV is not a cause of AIDS. So there's a lot there. Talk about the concerns his statement about autism raises. Him saying that we should be looking at environmental and external factors.
So when we talk about environmental factor for autism, it's anything in the environment of the child and the mother that can be connected. So it could also be, the food that they are having, not necessarily just the, general environment as in the temperature and global warming, etc., etc. It could be anything that the mother and the child have been doing. So one of the biggest concerns that people have is that he might, end up proving, so to say, that certain vaccines cause autism. So he has through his non-profit earlier, like you mentioned, shared a lot of these theories where he says that measles vaccine is linked to autism, or there's this compound within the vaccines which used to be used as a preservative in certain vaccine called thimerosal, which also he has said that could be linked to autism, or just the number of vaccines. So the theories first emerged with this one, paper in the Lancet journal where a gastroenterologist said some 11 children who came into my clinic had autism and had been given the MMR shot. And this received a lot of attention. But the problem is this was not, there was no control to it. We didn't see whether, what's the rate of autism in the unvaccinated children.
So this was not a standardized scientific experiment. This was just an observation.
Yes, this was an observation from his own clinic. And he had said that this is a consecutive case series, which meant that, he consecutively saw 11 people. But that was not the case. He had cherry-picked those cases where there was autism. So it's not the best of scientific, evidences. And that sort of started this ball rolling where people connected MMR vaccine in particular with autism. The problem is MMR is also given at the age of about 15 months when you first start noticing signs of autism. So it doesn't have to be linked. The time period is similar for both. So then, of course, this theory was debunked by several, research articles that followed. And this paper itself was retracted by Lancet. Then people said, if not, the MMR vaccine, then probably this particular mercury compound that's used in the vaccines. And even though there was no proof of that, this compound was actually removed from most of the vaccines. And again, no studies have shown that there is a link. Then people said, maybe it's because of the number of vaccines that are given to children in, a short window of time. Again, no evidence to suggest that. But these are theories that Mr. RFK Jr. has echoed in the past. So there are concerns that he might say that these are the reasons for autism.
Okay, and Anonna, all this is happening in the US, miles and miles away. But is there a reason for other countries like India to be concerned about this?
Yes. First of all, if we say, autism has a specific cause, then you would try to eliminate that cause so that, autism goes down. But that might also harm the investment that is already happening to research autism and also to help people with autism. Because one of the key things with people who have ASD is that you have to start intervening early, and they have to be taught the life skills. So they're not able to comprehend, say, brushing your teeth or tying your shoe the same way you and I can. But if you break down those tasks early on, they may be able to do that. So this early intervention, this training is very essential for autistic children, and that might, go away if enough people believe that the reason is some environmental factor that we can eliminate. Then secondly, of course, and this is a bigger concern, is if we blame the vaccines. So you must have heard in US, it's already a challenge. People are not taking the MMR vaccine, and that has led to the resurgence of measles in a few states in US, and in fact has caused some deaths also. In India, we already have measles cases and deaths. It's an endemic country. And Right now, we are doing fantastic. Over the last few years, we've been able to vaccinate most of the children. Of course, that did dip during the pandemic, and there was an outbreak in Maharashtra and a few other states. But that was controlled. And since then, there have been focused vaccination drives, and we have a good vaccination rate at the moment. And if more and more people start believing this theory, then that goes away. We lose the gains that we've made with vaccination.
And besides his comment about external factors, he has also drawn flack because he said that autism destroys lives.
And these are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children, and we need to put...
Now, this is something that many within the autism community have taken real umbrage to, because they feel that this statement especially really stigmatizes autism and those who have it.
So actually, there is a history of evolution of the term ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. And now anybody with ASD is referred to as neurodivergent. They are not called abnormal and you and I are not normal. We are neurotypical, they are neurodiverse. And that's a good way to look at people with autism, because yes, like I mentioned, there would be some people who might not be able to do all the tasks and they might require help of a family member throughout their life. But then there are others who can lead completely independent lives, and they can train to do, all the daily tasks, maintaining hygiene, keeping up with your chores, everything. They need everything to be in order usually, but a lot of people are able to manage all the tasks that, so-called we consider to be normal. They're able to live their lives like that. They just need certain adjustments probably. And the good thing is people with autism can be hyper-focused on certain things, which means that they could be actually better at certain jobs. So for example, if you have to look for errors in coding, a person with autism can actually be very good at it because they are very, very thorough with what they're doing. They can make very good doctors if they have the ability to, learn those tasks.
And on the other end, there's also this stereotype, right? Where especially in movies, people with autism are shown to have a photographic memory and they're supposed to be amazing at math. People who have something called the savant syndrome, basically, which is also something one imagines that people with autism have to deal with.
Yes, that's a positive stereotype, but nonetheless, that's not true of everybody. Yes, there are a few people who are very good at certain tasks and, they can do very well for themselves in certain fields of work. But we shouldn't consider this to be easy. It is a difficult task, but it is something that can be learned. So just like we teach children about different values, etc., there's just a little bit more help that people with autism need, but they can be taught to do their, day-to-day work. But again, yes, there is more, when we talk about autistic people, most people think about those with savant syndrome. That's not the case with everybody, but they're also not the burden that, Mr. RFK is trying to portray them as.
And Anonna, how prevalent is autism in India? Do we know?
So the WHO says globally the prevalence is about 1 in 100, and the United States figure is of course now 1 in 36 children have autism. When it comes to India, I think AIMS did a study in 2011 where they found the prevalence to be 1 in 89. And then there is another study which was done, I think in 2018 or so, which found it to be 1 in 68. So yes, less prevalent than the US, but that could also be because a lot of people do not get the diagnosis in India. So if they are fairly functional, they might not actually get evaluated at all.
And Anonna, talk about the symptoms that, parents especially should be looking out for when it comes to detecting autism. What should they keep in mind?
So, of course, the diagnosis comes after extensive tests that are done by doctors. But it could be a suspicion in your mind if they're not, say, babbling by the age of 9 months, if they can't speak their first words by, say, 15, 16 months, if they do not make eye contact with family members, if they do not, respond to their names being called out, if they do not react to seeing their mother, father, grandfather, whatever, like either being happy or being annoyed or some kind of expression, if they are not giving that expression. These are, some of the symptoms that people can easily, look out for at home. Then, of course, there are some in children who have, they are at the more severe end of the spectrum. They might have certain self-harming sort of activities where, say, they bang their head or they hurt themselves. And that's just a way of coping with what they cannot say. So that could indicate that they have autism. There's also usually most children with autism have some repetitive behaviors. So they might, arrange their toys in a very specific way or walk around in a very specific way in their homes. So these are all, say, indicators which might tell you that your child has autism. And then, of course, you'll have to go to your pediatrician and consult. There are child psychologists and psychiatrists who would evaluate the child, or even child neurologists could evaluate the child. There are, various tests that are done, and then you come to the diagnosis. And of course, after the diagnosis, the most important thing is getting help of an educator, a trainer who can, train children in a specific way. So, for example, some children with ASD could be very visual learners. So you have to break tasks down visually. You show them photographs. Okay, this is your mother, this is your father, this is your grandmother, this is your grandfather. You show them the photograph of whoever they are visiting. You have to make these visual schedules so that they can follow that. So there are various ways in which the tasks are broken down in a way that they can understand and perform them. And this is the kind of support that children with ASD need very early on, so that they can be taught at the same time when the brain development is happening.
And next, we shift focus to an issue that unfortunately has become rather common in the country. Almost every other year, at some event or the other, particularly religious gatherings, we hear of stampedes that result in the tragic loss of lives. Now, a similar incident took place in Goa earlier this month. During a local religious festival at the Lairai Devi temple, the incident killed a total of 6 people and injured over 100. What is noteworthy is that a newly released fact-finding report by a government-appointed committee now reveals that the tragedy was entirely preventable. To know more about this report and its findings, we speak to the Indian Express's Pavneet Singh Chadha, who reports on Goa for the newspaper. Pavneet, before we talk about this fact-finding report, can you start by telling us a bit about this incident itself?
So there is a festival here, a temple festival, annual festival. It's called Lairai Devi Jatra, which happens every year in the month of April or May, depending on the lunar calendar, in Shirgaon, which comes under Picholi in North Goa. And as part of the festival, it attracts a huge crowd of devotees. By some estimates, the crowd exceeds 1 lakh or even more. And the special devotees of the goddess Lairai Devi are called Dhonds. This is a community who, in the lead up to the festival, are fasting. They abstain from a lot of things. And a key component of this festival is a ritual in which these devotees, Dhonds, they undertake a ritual where they first take a bath in a holy pond, and they walk for about a kilometer towards the festival, where they observe a ritual in which they walk on burning embers of coal. So this is a central component, a ritual that is observed. It's a 5-day festival, and this ritual is observed on the 2nd or the 3rd day.
Right. And what do we know about, what exactly happened in Shirgaon that day? Like, what events led up to the incident?
So on May 3rd, early morning around 3 a.m., a stampede was reported when a huge surge of devotees were walking towards the festival, in which 6 people were killed and close to 100 people were injured. And what happened in the aftermath of the incident, this was a tragedy that the Chief Minister Pramod Sawant said that it was one of the biggest tragedies in recent memory in Goa. A stampede like this has never occurred. So to investigate the causes of this stampede and what led to, if there were any lapses, the government formed a 4-member fact-finding committee led by the Revenue Secretary. And that committee submitted its report to the government last week, and the report was released 2 days ago.
And so, according to this report, what exactly triggered the stampede? And why did it spiral so quickly out of control?
Right. So, according to the fact finding committee report, where they interviewed a lot of people who were injured in the stampede, spoke to the key stakeholders, their conclusion is that the stampede was entirely preventable and it happened due to a convergence of a lot of factors, including absence of any crowd control infrastructure, failure to use modern surveillance methods like drones, a disregard of any sort of administrative instructions which were passed on to the stakeholders. And all these factors led to a breakdown in security, which led to the stampede. So the committee has pinpointed that the immediate trigger was overcrowding on a sloped pathway. And because the topography of the area is such that due to that, there was a lot of pushing and shoving. And one woman fell face down, and that sort of triggered a domino effect, a chain reaction, which led to the incident.
But Pavneet, beyond this moment of collapse, what were the other planning failures that, allowed this to become fatal?
Right. In the report, the committee says that all this was preventable, that this arose from inadequate crowd risk assessment, absence of any circulation planning, non implementation of safety directives, and unregulated roadside vending stalls also. The committee said that when it comes to sort of pinning the blame, the committee pinpointed failures on part of the temple committee, police, district administration. So the committee observed that, for instance, the temple committee, which organizes the jatra, they did not preempt the crowd, the number of crowd that could sort of come there. And had they done so, if there was proper barricading, if there was a evacuation plan, or a queue was systematic, the tragedy could have been prevented. The committee also said that the organizers ignored specific instructions which had been issued by them by the revenue and police authorities. The committee said that the organizers neither demonstrated an intent nor undertook any concrete steps to prevent proliferation of stalls along that sloped pathway. So what happens is it's a narrow road, it has an incline, and on both the sides a lot of stalls selling food items and the puja items are sold, which also sort of created a cluttered pathway, compounding the issue.
And as you mentioned, that the report also names several other stakeholders like the district police and administration and even the panchayat. So, can you tell us how did they fell short of their responsibilities?
So, when it comes to the district administration, the committee said that there had been meetings that were conducted prior to the festival where a lot of observations were discussed, safety measures were discussed, but they did not translate into enforceable directives. So, since these instructions were not implemented, there's a lapse on part of the administration as well. Then, when it comes to the police, similar thing. We had reported earlier that the police had written to the temple committee and told them 2 days before the event that CCTV cameras need to be installed and there has to be proper barricading. But that also didn't happen. So the committee has now pinpointed blame on all these stakeholders, including the village panchayat also, for issuing NOCs to a lot of people to put up these stalls without doing any sort of exercise to estimate or preempt that issues of overcrowding or the possibility of any contingency. So, like, to summarize, the committee said that this tragedy was entirely preventable and it stemmed from a combination of poor planning, lack of enforcement, some ignored directives, and inadequate infrastructure.
Right, and you also mentioned earlier that Goa's chief minister called the stampede an eye opener. So, can you tell us what kind of changes can we actually expect on the ground from this?
So, in the media briefing, the chief minister pointed out that going forward, there will be a nodal officer who will be appointed for all religious festivals that happen, which involve a large number of crowd. And detailed SOPs will be put in place, which will have all planning about the number of people who are coming, crowd control measures that are in place, whether CCTV cameras are installed or not, whether there is a circulation pattern for evacuation in case of a contingency. So SOPs will be assigned. At the same time, it has been mentioned by the government that there will be a detailed inquiry. A police FIR was filed and that inquiry will be conducted parallelly. And as part of that inquiry, show cause notices have been issued to the collector, to the SP of the area, to DSP, to Mamlatdar, revenue officials, temple committee, panchayat officials. So that inquiry will parallelly continue. At the same time, there are certain recommendations that have been made by the committee, which involve measures related to event management, use of alternate routes, surveillance, having watchtowers and drones installed. So those sort of things will be put in place. So based on the recommendations, the government will now deliberate and come up with a plan in future.
And lastly, Pavneet, you've been reporting from the ground since the day of the stampede. So, what has struck you the most about this case? Like, was it the lack of infrastructure, the ignored warnings you mentioned earlier, or just the aftermath?
So it's actually a bit of all the things. When we spoke to eyewitnesses who attended the Jatra and have been attending the Jatra for decades, they said this was a tragedy waiting to happen. And it was also mentioned by several eyewitnesses, and it is a part of the committee report also, that last year also a similar sort of incident had happened where one woman got injured and one woman suffocated to death also. So in hindsight, yes, a lot of things could have been done, which have been pointed out in the report, which I'm sure now the government also made a mention of widening the road, which is a sort of good input. Because if you remove the stalls on both the sides or you sort of regulate the number of stalls, it creates a better, makes way for from a topographic perspective also and crowd management perspective. That's a better way to. And what struck me the most also was that among the 6 people who died, there was one family who lost 2 people, in which one devotee was a 16-year-old boy, who had been going to the Jatra for the last 4 years, and he had been observing the protocol, which such as abstaining from eating food or, the strict code that is followed by these devotees. He was observing that. So he was one of the first people who fell and he was killed on the spot. So that was a very tragic thing that, that such a young life was cut short. His family told us that he wanted to be a police officer, join the police force. So how these tragedies, they leave a mark on sort of upend lives of people forever.
And in the end, we talk about President Droupadi Murmu's statement questioning a recent Supreme Court judgment. In a recent move following the Supreme Court's landmark ruling that set a 3-month deadline for the president to act on bills referred by governors, President Droupadi Murmu has formally referred a set of questions to the court under Article 143(1) of the Constitution. The Supreme Court had held that any delay beyond 3 months must be justified and communicated to the concerned state government. This ruling came in the context of Tamil Nadu Governor R.N. Ravi reserving 10 reconsidered bills for the president's assent, a move the court deemed illegal and erroneous. Now, President Murmu has sought the court's opinion on whether courts can set deadlines or issue directions on how the president or governor should handle bills passed by state legislatures. She has raised several key questions, including whether the Constitution allows courts to review or limit the discretion of the president or a governor, especially since it does not specify any time limit for them to act on bills. She also asked whether Article 361, which provides legal protection to the president and governors, completely prevents courts from examining their decisions. As part of the questions, she also asked whether the president must always consult the Supreme Court before deciding on a bill, and whether courts can review the content of a bill before it becomes a law. She also asked if courts can use Article 142 to override or substitute decisions made by the president or a governor. The reference also seeks clarity on whether a governor is bound by the aid and advice of the State Council of Ministers in all cases under Article 200, and what constitutional options are available when a bill is presented for assent. The President pointed to the absence of timelines or procedural guidance in Articles 200 and 201 and asked whether courts can fill these gaps through judicial interpretation. This move places the Supreme Court at the heart of a fundamental debate over the separation of powers and the limits of judicial oversight in the functioning of constitutional authorities. It also comes at a time of rising tension between state governments and centrally appointed governors, with delays in assenting to bills becoming a key point of legal and political friction. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh, Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Ichha, Sharma. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.